Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. Today, we embark on a special journey, revisiting 6 shocking criminal case files that once shook the Vietnamese community in the United States, where the line between peaceful everyday life and the darkness of crime became more fragile than ever. We begin with the tragedy of a talented female attorney who was murdered in the middle of a bustling Atlanta intersection, then relive the suffocating 15 horrifying seconds in which the gunman known as Fat John unleashed deadly violence inside a California nightclub. This video will also unravel the distorted mind of a Prodigy engineer who killed a stranger merely to experiment. Alongside these are the cold-blooded purges behind coffee shops in San Jose and a recent shooting in Elk Grove involving the suspicious assistance of a young Vietnamese-American woman. Whether driven by gang hatred, sudden conflict, or twisted psychology, what these cases share is the relentless pursuit of justice, sometimes lasting decades, to bring the perpetrators into the light. And if you enjoy investigative true crime content and want to follow along with Vietnamese case files in upcoming cases, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss a single episode. Now, let's begin. At around 1:30 a.m. on Sunday, the 2nd of November 2025, in Elk Grove, California, local police received a series of frantic 911 calls reporting a shooting inside a bar on Elk Grove, Florin Road. Rapid response units were immediately deployed. When officers arrived, chaos unfolded before them. The music had stopped abruptly, tables and chairs were overturned, and dozens of patrons were screaming and rushing toward the exits. Several cars sped out of the parking lot as if trying to flee the scene of the tragedy. Amid the commotion, officers found 3 men collapsed inside the bar, all suffering from gunshot. First aid was administered on site, but 1 victim died at the scene due to the severity of his injuries. The remaining 2 were rushed to the hospital in critical condition. In addition, witnesses reported that there was another victim who had driven himself away from the bar immediately after the shooting and was being treated at a nearby hospital. The crime scene was quickly secured for investigation. Inside the bar, bullet casings were scattered across the floor, tables and chairs were pushed aside, and shattered glass covered the area. At the spot where the victims had fallen, large pools of blood marked a haunting scene. The body of the deceased victim was found lying on the dance floor, surrounded by bullet marks on the walls and long skid streaks across the ground, traces left behind as panicked patrons scrambled to escape. That same night, police began collecting evidence and interviewing witnesses. Based on the number of shell casings recovered, investigators estimated that the shooter had fired approximately 4 to 5 rounds toward the victims. Bullet impacts on the walls and surrounding furniture indicated that the shots were fired from the area near the bar counter. Fortunately, the bar's security camera system captured part of the incident. The footage showed the crowded room erupting into chaos as people fled in all directions, and for a brief moment, the silhouette of a man holding what appeared to be a handgun passed through the frame. At the same time, 2 surviving victims, after being stabilized, provided crucial information about the suspect. They recalled that the shooter was a middle-aged man, heavy-set, and likely in his early 40s. An argument had broken out between him and one of the victims shortly before he pulled the trigger. Other witnesses also reported that the suspect had been accompanied by a young Asian woman at the time of the shooting. This detail immediately caught investigators' attention. Using all available clues, Elk Grove police worked with neighboring agencies to cross-reference the suspect's description with local criminal databases. In less than 2 days, a promising name emerged. Roderick Randall, 43, a resident of Sacramento. Randall had an extensive criminal record, and his appearance matched the witness descriptions almost perfectly. Forensic work at the scene also revealed Randall's fingerprint on a door near the shooting area, matched through DNA and biometric data from his prior arrest records. With this information, police conducted searches at all known addresses associated with Randall. However, he was nowhere to be found. Early indications suggested that Randall had deliberately gone into hiding immediately after the shooting and was likely moving between different locations to avoid detection. Randall's behavior after the crime showed he was exceptionally cunning. He powered off all personal electronic devices, avoided using credit cards, and made no bank transactions, effectively cutting off all digital trails and making technical tracking nearly impossible. Elk Grove Police, in coordination with Sacramento authorities, issued a nationwide warrant for Roderick Randall. His information was added to the federal criminal database, and the FBI was notified for potential support. Meanwhile, police set up 24/7 surveillance at Randall's known hangouts in case he attempted to return. Airports and state border checkpoints also strengthened passenger identity checks to ensure the fugitive would be detected if he tried to flee. Alongside the physical manhunt, police also prepared tactical plans in case of a direct confrontation with Randall. Because the suspect had a history of violent offenses and was believed to be armed, special response teams were kept on high alert, ready for the possibility that he might resist arrest aggressively. Meanwhile, Vietnamese language media outlets in California quickly began reporting on the case. Information about the shooting and the manhunt spread widely across Vietnamese American community channels. During a background check, investigators discovered that Randall had a Vietnamese American girlfriend named Tran Kim Thao, 25. This immediately reminded them of witness statements describing an Asian woman seen with the suspect inside the bar on the night of the shooting. This raised the possibility that she was present at the scene or had assisted Randall before, during, or after the attack. To clarify her involvement, police issued a summons for Kim Thao, but she failed to appear. Her sudden disappearance strengthened suspicions that she might be helping Randall evade capture or might even be fleeing with him. Faced with this situation, law enforcement decided to set a trap. They began monitoring Thao's communications, including phone activity and social media, while covertly watching locations she was likely to visit. On November 4, 2025, police detected Tran Kim Thao's phone signal in an area of Elk Grove. A tactical team was immediately dispatched. There, police successfully arrested Tran Kim Thao late that night, charging her as an accomplice in the bar shooting. She was taken to the police station for questioning and held in custody pending investigation. As of now, authorities have not released specific details about her role in the crime. What is known is that despite days of nonstop searching, Roderick Randall remains at large. Elk Grove police, along with assisting agencies, continue to pursue every lead, no matter how small, to narrow down the search radius. Although the manhunt has faced numerous challenges, investigators believe that with an extensive surveillance network and strong community cooperation, Randall's capture is only a matter of time. While the investigation continued urgently, police simultaneously worked to identify the victims and notify their families. At the scene, identification documents confirmed that the man who died on site was Huynh Kim Ka, 18, a Vietnamese American youth from Chino Hills in Southern California. According to the Sacramento County Medical Examiner's Office, Kim Ka died from a gunshot wound to the chest that caused massive blood loss before he could be transported to the hospital. At the time of the shooting, he had just graduated high school and was on a trip to Northern California to visit friends. Those who knew him described Kim Ka as energetic, friendly, always smiling, and someone who brought positivity to everyone around him. The second critically injured victim was Vo Minh Phuc, 34, a resident of San Jose. He had been shot in the abdomen and suffered severe blood loss. Despite emergency surgery, his injuries were too extensive. Phuc passed away on November 6, 2025, 4 days after the shooting. His body was later transported back to San Jose for funeral arrangements. Neighbors described Phuc as a kind, soft-spoken, and exemplary man who had never been involved in any serious trouble. It remains unclear why he was at the Z-Town bar that night, but it is believed he may have been visiting Sacramento with friends for the weekend and stopped by the bar for entertainment. The remaining two victims were young men aged 25 and 26. They sustained injuries but were not in life-threatening condition and were discharged from the hospital a few days later. For privacy reasons, police did not release their names, but it is known that both were regular patrons of the Z-Town bar and were Asian American residents of the local area. One striking detail was that all 4 victims in the incident were either Vietnamese or of Asian descent. This raised a pressing question among the public. Was the shooter intentionally targeting this specific group? However, investigators have so far found no evidence that the attack was motivated by racial bias or community hatred. According to initial findings, Randall had no prior connection to Huynh, Kim Ka, Vo Minh Phuc, or any of the other victims. The motive behind the tragedy is still under investigation, but it is believed to have stemmed from a minor confrontation inside the bar between Randall and one of the victims. Alongside the manhunt, police also worked to gather Randall's complete personal and criminal background. Through this process, the portrait of the gunman became clearer, a man with a long, violent criminal history. Roderick Randall, born around 1982, is an American citizen from Sacramento, California. Records from the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office and the California Department of Corrections reveal that Randall's criminal career began at a very young age. His first recorded conviction came in 2003, when he was about 21 years old, for recruiting a minor into illegal activities. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison and required to register as a sex offender, a lifelong label he would carry. Due to time served before trial and reported good behavior, Randall was released in late 2005 but remained under strict supervision. However, just 1 year later, in 2006, he reoffended, this time for burglary and theft. He was sentenced to another 6 years. During his incarceration, he repeatedly violated prison rules, delaying his release until 2009. Not long after returning to society, he violated probation again and was sent back to jail at the end of 2009, serving several more months before being released in 2010. By late 2012, he had officially completed his probation, seemingly having paid his debt to society. For a brief moment, it appeared as if Randall might finally step away from the criminal path that had defined his early adulthood. Later that same year, Randall became entangled in a coordinated shooting connected to gang operations in Sacramento, a case that once again placed him under the scrutiny of law enforcement and showed that his violent tendencies had not faded. Although he did not pull the trigger, he was charged as an accomplice and played a supporting role in a plan that resulted in 4 counts of attempted murder. The 2014 trial ended with a staggering 88-year prison sentence for Randall. Many believed this would finally put an end to his criminal life, but a legal turning point was about to arrive. In 2019, California enacted criminal justice reforms allowing reduced or overturned sentences for accomplices in homicide cases if they did not directly commit the killing or did not intend for anyone to be harmed. Randall's case qualified for review because he had been convicted purely as an accomplice, not as the shooter. After the appeals process, his 88-year sentence was overturned. In 2023, he was released early, becoming a prime example of someone granted a second chance under the reform law. However, his early release alarmed prosecutors and law enforcement as his extensive criminal history strongly indicated a continued pattern of violent behavior. As expected, Randall showed no intention of turning his life around after leaving prison. Instead, he returned to his old ways, violating the law whenever opportunities arose. According to multiple sources, between 2023 and 2025, Randall moved between several Northern California cities, worked odd jobs, and maintained connections with criminal circles in the region. Notably, at the age of 43, Randall began a relationship with a Vietnamese American woman nearly 20 years younger, Tran Kim Thao, a U.S. citizen, living in the Sacramento area. Those who knew her described Thao as a soft-spoken, attractive young woman with no previous signs of instability. Her connection to a shooting case left many shocked. According to an unofficial source, Thao met Randall on social media in 2024 and was drawn to his charm and the life experience he portrayed. Their relationship escalated quickly despite the age difference in Randall's criminal past. In this case, Tran Kim Thao was believed to have assisted Randall to some degree. Some theories suggest she may have helped him bring a weapon into the bar or aided in hiding his whereabouts after the attack. It is also possible that she drove Randall away from the scene before the two later separated. So far, police have not disclosed specifics about Thao's actions, only confirming that she did not fire the weapon but played a significant supporting role. If proven in court, she could face many years in prison for her involvement. In summary, the background of Roderick Randall shows a dangerous repeat offender who disregarded the law and displayed a clear pattern of violence. His early release from prison, followed by immediate involvement in another crime, highlighted a violent nature that had never changed. As for Tran Kim Thao, regardless of her exact level of involvement, she ultimately became a key link in Randall's criminal chain. After the shooting, legal proceedings moved quickly, even though the primary suspect, Roderick Randall, remained at large. The first to face the justice system was Tran Kim Thao, who was charged as an accomplice to murder and an accomplice to aggravated assault in the bar shooting. The judge denied Thao's bail request, citing the extreme severity of the case and the risk that she might flee or obstruct the investigation if released. This meant Thao would remain in county jail until trial. While awaiting her court date, she spent her days in detention. According to some sources, she is under special monitoring due to signs of depression and emotional distress following her arrest. As for Roderick Randall, although he has yet to be captured, the charges and warrants against him have been fully prepared. The Sacramento County District Attorney's Office stated that Randall will face charges including first-degree murder for the deaths of Huynh Kim Ka and Vo Min Phuc, attempted murder for the 2 surviving victims, and potentially additional charges for unlawful possession of a firearm, as he is a convicted felon prohibited from having a weapon. If arrested and convicted, Randall could face life in prison without parole or even the death penalty. And although California currently maintains a moratorium on executions, the law still allows death sentences in cases involving multiple victims. However, everything ultimately depends on capturing Randall. While he remains at large, the court may hold certain in absentia hearings to streamline federal warrant procedures, reducing delays once Randall is eventually apprehended. Meanwhile, prosecutors are preparing grand jury documents, with expectations to pursue the highest possible charges. The only legal defense he might attempt would likely center on mitigating factors such as intoxication or sudden provocation. But given his extensive criminal history and violent past, the chances of leniency are virtually non-existent. The public continues to follow the case closely. On social media, especially within the Vietnamese American community, the story of a young Vietnamese woman, Tran Kim Thao, helping a killer target fellow Vietnamese spread rapidly, generating waves of outrage and disbelief. Some argue that Thao may have been psychologically manipulated by an older, dangerous criminal. However, many others firmly condemn her actions, emphasizing that regardless of the circumstances, complicity in a violent crime is unforgivable. In the media, the case drew intense public attention. Major U.S. outlets such as CBS and ABC News California continuously reported updates on the investigation and the ongoing manhunt. Notably, the fact that a criminal once sentenced to 88 years in prison had been released early, only to commit another violent offense, became a heated topic that sparked widespread outrage. Many newspapers began questioning California's criminal justice reform policies. Was there a legal loophole that allowed a dangerous offender like Randall to be released far too soon? The debate quickly spread across legal forums. Some experts argued that the Randall case was a clear example of the risks associated with excessive sentence reductions, emphasizing that the justice system must be more cautious with offenders who display persistent violent tendencies. On the other hand, supporters of criminal justice reform contended that one isolated case should not invalidate the humanitarian purpose of the law, as many individuals had genuinely rebuilt their lives after being given a second chance. On the evening of December 5th, 2014, San Jose police received an urgent report of multiple gunshots fired behind the Golden King Café on Alum Rock Avenue. Just minutes later, detectives and an ambulance arrived at the scene. What they saw was chaos that could chill anyone to the bone. A middle-aged Asian man lying face down on the concrete, blood spreading around him. The victim's body showed multiple gunshot wounds. Around the body, 6 9mm shell casings were scattered. Those casings, along with marks left on the wall, suggested the weapon was most likely a semi-automatic handgun. There were no clear signs of a struggle or resistance, suggesting the victim had no time to react before the sudden volley. When investigators checked his pockets, they found his wallet and phone still intact, indicating robbery was not the motive. What stood out to detectives was the shooter's calm precision. The attacker struck quickly and disappeared immediately, leaving behind very little evidence to follow. Using the identification found in the victim's wallet, police quickly determined that the man was Duong Dien Thiet Thach, 41 years old. Records indicated that Mr. Thach was Vietnamese, immigrated to the United States in the 1990s, and had lived for many years in San Jose, an area with a large Vietnamese community. While investigators reviewed his background, several close friends shared that he enjoyed card games and sometimes visited black market cafes to play dice for entertainment. This seemingly ordinary detail caught detectives' attention because that environment is inherently risky and often involves complex connections. Even so, preliminary checks showed that Dung Dien Thiet Tat had no criminal record and was not on any list of gang-linked individuals being monitored by police. That left detectives puzzled because there were no signs he had been involved in any major conflict or serious vendetta. That was why the key question became, how did a middle-aged man described as living a fairly quiet life become the target of such a cold-blooded attack? Those doubts heated the investigation by the hour and forced police to dig deeper into every clue recovered at the scene to find the next direction. As the formal investigation began, San Jose police quickly realized they were dealing with an almost clean crime scene. The perpetrators left no fingerprints, DNA, or any direct lead aside from a few scattered shell casings. This hardly looked like a spontaneous act by an amateur. It appeared to be a carefully calculated hit. Investigators believed the victim was likely killed in an execution-style attack, meaning the shooter had a specific target, moved in quickly, fired, and immediately fled, possibly with ties to underground criminal organizations operating in the area. The Golden King owner's statement helped police establish a key timeline. That evening, Mr. Tech stopped by, played a few rounds on a gambling machine, and then sat alone drinking coffee. The owner also insisted that he had no arguments or conflicts with anyone inside the shop. After he finished, Mr. Tech left the cafe and walked out to the rear parking lot where, only minutes later, the tragic shooting occurred. Notably, Golden King Tea House was known in the community as a gathering spot with disguised gambling activity, and it had previously been on law enforcement's radar. That meant investigators could not rule out the possibility that the victim had unintentionally crossed paths with or become entangled with some underground force there. Whether his presence that night had any connection to criminal groups operating in the area remained a question detectives had to keep pursuing. Fortunately, the Golden King security camera system pointed directly toward the rear parking area. That same night, the recording hard drive was sealed and taken back to police headquarters for data extraction. Technicians patiently replayed the footage from the evening of December 5th, 2014, step by step reconstructing what happened. According to the video, after spending a little over an hour inside Golden King Tea House, Mr. Tech stood up, paid, and headed out the back door. The parking lot was quiet and dark at the time, so he had no idea that two suspicious figures had already been waiting there. Based on the camera angle and initial analysis, the two suspects were believed to have been tracking the victim from the moment he was still inside the shop. One stayed close behind, while the other moved around the outside to provide backup. They kept a distance of a few meters and patiently waited until Mr. Tech walked deeper into the most secluded part of the parking lot before making their move. At around 7:55 p.m., just as Mr. Tech approached his car and reached for the door, two shadowy figures suddenly closed in from behind. In a split second, one of them drew a gun, aimed directly at his back, and fired the first shot. The impact pitched Mr. Tech forward and he tried to turn around, but he was immediately hit by several more rapid shots. A witness nearby said the shots rang out in quick succession with no sign of arguing or a struggle beforehand, indicating this was almost certainly a carefully prepared ambush. The entire attack lasted only a few dozen seconds. After the sudden volley, Mr. Tech collapsed with critical injuries. Once they were sure the victim was no longer moving, the two attackers ran out of the alley. A dark-colored car parked nearby with its lights off was believed to be the waiting getaway vehicle, allowing them to leave the scene in under a minute. According to the footage, one of the shooters had a slender build, wore a black hooded sweatshirt with the hood up, and light-colored pants. The other wore a black and white jacket, black clothing underneath, and a baseball cap. Although both figures' builds were captured fairly clearly, their faces were completely concealed. One kept his head down throughout the surveillance, while the other mostly had his back to the camera, making identification extremely difficult. Police could only determine that both were Asian males, roughly 20 to 35 years old, and about 1.65 to 1.70 meters tall. After analyzing the video, investigators broadened their comparison of the method of attack to other incidents in the area. While reviewing case files, they discovered that just 7 months earlier, there had been another shooting with a few similar elements. In April 2014, a Vietnamese man was shot in the parking lot of an event in San Jose. However, that incident occurred after a loud physical altercation completely different from the cold, calculated nature of the Golden King shooting. Even though the circumstances did not match, the overlap in the victim's background and the location still raised questions for investigators. Could there be a series of killings targeting Vietnamese people at nightlife hangouts in the city? This new line of suspicion forced investigators to weigh their next steps more carefully. Police then quietly contacted a unit specializing in gang crime to verify additional information. From internal sources, they learned that rumors were spreading within the community about a Vietnamese gang seeking to tighten control over gambling cafes. The group was said to be willing to deal with anyone who threatened their illegal operations, especially those who resisted or refused to fall in line. Even with this additional information, the investigation remained stuck for months. The identities of the two attackers stayed lost in the dark. Public pressure continued to rise, while fear spread through the Vietnamese community because no one knew whether this was an isolated incident or merely the visible tip of a broader underground conflict. In response, the San Jose Police Department was forced to change its strategy. In March 2015, they launched Operation Omni, a large-scale crackdown aimed at raiding multiple Vietnamese cafes suspected of housing illegal slot machines. More than 11 locations in East and South San Jose were hit in surprise inspections. The results revealed just how complex the local vice scene was. Authorities seized a total of 85 gambling machines and uncovered other activities hidden behind these hangouts, such as the sale of illegal substances and brokering of illicit services. In that sense, Mr. Tech's case became the tipping point, pushing police to aggressively shut down a network of long-standing hotspots in the area. Operation Omni did help clean up part of the city, but what continued to haunt everyone was that the true killers in this case still had not been identified and remained outside the reach of justice. Not until 2016 did the case suddenly take an unexpected step forward. In March 2016, a similar shooting occurred at the Bowman Café on Thule Road. The victim was Brian Lay, 43 years old, attacked by an intruder who had his face covered with a knit cap. The swift, direct approach made it impossible for police not to think back to the Golden King case. Just 3 months later, in June 2016, tragedy struck again. Justin Chun, 26 years old, was shot while sitting in his car in front of his home. The shooter walked up, fired at close range, and fled the scene in a black Lexus. Notably, both victims were Vietnamese, and both had a habit of frequenting entertainment cafes similar to Mr. Thek's routine before he was killed in late 2014. A string of murders within just 3 years, focused on victims with similar lifestyles, led police to form a stronger hypothesis. Were these cases tightly connected and driven by the same Vietnamese criminal group? This new line of reasoning put the entire investigative effort on high alert. At that point, police decided to release part of the evidence publicly to ask the community for help. On July 19, 2016, video clips extracted from the surveillance footage in the Golden King and Bowman Cafe murders were provided to the media. Many outlets replayed the footage frame by frame, showing the moment two unknown men approached Mr. Tech from behind just before the attack. Even though the faces were unclear, investigators hoped someone might recognize their build, gait, or clothing. This public appeal gave the investigation a significant boost. Some people who had operated in the underground world began sending anonymous tips to police. They pointed to a prominent Vietnamese gang in San Jose that provided protection for gambling machines in many cafes. The group was described as highly organized and even capable of bribing insiders to obtain confidential information from law enforcement. When investigators received these tips, they were not overly surprised, because since March 2016, they had quietly been running an operation to dismantle a large Vietnamese criminal organization in the area. The new leads seemed to align with the direction they had been pursuing all along. In August 2016, the police operation reached a critical peak. In total, 34 search warrants were executed simultaneously, resulting in the arrest of 23 suspects. Most shocking of all was the allegation that a San Jose police officer with 9 years of experience had aided the gang. Evidence piled up in property rooms, including dozens of firearms, multiple types of illegal substances, 69 gambling machines, more than 200,000 USD in cash, and even an alligator kept as a display of power and to intimidate rivals. What particularly concerned investigators was that federal authorities said some of the people arrested were connected to unsolved homicides, including cases under investigation in San Jose. However, Their specific identities or roles in those killings were not disclosed. Just when it seemed the investigation was closing in on the truth, everything suddenly went quiet. Although police dismantled a large criminal network, they still found no direct evidence to charge anyone in the murder of Mr. Thach Duong. The absence of key evidence gradually pushed the file into the cold case category, making it one of San Jose's most haunting unresolved cases for many years. Another surprise came in March 2020, when San Jose police announced they had arrested 3 suspects and issued a warrant for a 4th in connection with Justin Chun's case. The investigation stunned the community, because these men were not local Vietnamese suspects, as many had assumed. Instead, they were all from the Los Angeles area. The 3 arrested had criminal histories tied to activity in Los Angeles, while the suspect on the run had also been wanted in another case in Orange County in 2018. Based on this, police believe Justin Chun's shooting most likely stemmed from a personal dispute and was not directly connected to the string of Café-related killings suggested in the earlier theory. This turning point forced investigators to reassess their entire analysis of the remaining cases. Still, they did not rule out a more complex possibility, that a local gang had hired outsiders to carry out the hit in order to misdirect investigators and cover their tracks. None of these theories have been confirmed, because to this day, the Golden King case still has no officially charged suspects. Even so, based on what has been gathered, both police and informed sources share a similar sketch of who may be involved in Mr. Thach Duong's murder. Most likely, they were members of a Vietnamese gang operating in San Jose, one that stood behind the protection and control of disguised gambling dens inside multiple cafes across the area. The individuals most often mentioned are young Asian men, roughly 20 to 35 years old. Notably, among the 23 people arrested in the 2016 operation were many Vietnamese names in their 20s. For that reason, police still suspect the killers may be within that group or indirectly connected to it. If the gang theory is correct, the motive may have been pressure forcing the Golden King owner and other cafe owners in the area to obey the underground rules imposed by the criminal group. Another theory is that the owner may have previously been pressured to pay protection money tied to gambling machines, and Mr. Thach Duong became an example to send a message. It is also possible he was suspected of providing information to police, leading them to eliminate him to silence a potential leak. Another line of thinking is that the killers belong to a rival group seeking to take over territory, targeting a regular customer to undermine the credibility of the group protecting Golden King. While none of these theories have been proven, they help paint a picture of those behind the crime: cold, calculating, and willing to kill without hesitation. Up to this point, no trial has been held specifically for the murder of Duong Dien Thiet Thach, because investigators still have not identified a specific suspect. Even so, the legal system has been trying to move in another direction by focusing on related charges in order to gradually expose the criminal network behind it. From the 2016 crackdown operation, the 23 suspects arrested appeared in court in San Jose on charges such as illegal gambling, extortion, trafficking in illegal substances, weapons possession, and conspiracy. The most high-profile case was San Jose police officer Derek Antonio, who was charged with 5 felonies for leaking confidential information and assisting the gang. Most defendants pleaded guilty or were convicted through agreements, receiving sentences ranging from a few years to several decades in prison. As for Justin Chun's case in 2016, after police arrested 3 suspects in 2020, the Santa Clara County Court charged them with first-degree murder. With deeper investigation and coordination with Los Angeles authorities, law enforcement also discovered that the group was linked to another homicide in Southern California. However, as of 2025, one of the 4 suspects was still on the run, meaning the case could not be fully closed. From these developments, it is clear that the hunt for the person who killed Mr. Thach Duong is no less difficult, especially if the killer left the area or is hiding under the protection of accomplices. Without an arrest, justice for the victim and his family remains unfinished. Still, under the U.S. legal system, unresolved homicide cases generally do not expire, meaning that whether 5 years pass or 50, if sufficient evidence emerges, the case can be reopened, and the suspect, no matter where they hide, can be brought into the light. The Dung Dinh Tit Tek case not only shook the Vietnamese community because of its brutality, but also exposed dark realities lurking beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of immigrant life. It became a warning about community safety and the risk of underground crime seeping into activities that appear harmless. The social impact of the case was therefore far-reaching. The Vietnamese community in San Jose had long been close-knit and relatively calm, but after this incident, it went through a period of unmistakable fear and uncertainty. Some residents said they no longer dared to visit late-night cafes, afraid that one day they could become the next innocent victim. Some older community members even compared what happened to Hong Kong triad scenes from movies, except this time it was real life on American soil. Local and national media continued to report on the string of mysterious killings linked to Vietnamese victims, keeping public attention on edge. Even so, from a more positive angle, the case exposed the reality of disguised vice cafes and forced authorities to crack down, helping reduce some of the illegal activity in the Little Saigon area. The case also left many unanswered questions, such as whether the victim was truly a targeted hit or simply someone who was tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time. Among the dozens of people arrested in 2016, was anyone the mastermind? Sadly, to this day, all of these questions remain open. On the evening of November 22, 2001, which fell on Thanksgiving night, while many families were enjoying their reunion dinners, people at the parking lot of Phuoc Loc Thot Mall in Westminster were shocked by a horrifying scene. Loud shouts and the sounds of heavy impacts prompted several security guards and nearby shoppers to rush over. They saw a group of people in panic surrounding a young man lying motionless on the ground. The victim had sustained multiple severe injuries, while the attackers had already fled into the darkness. The report was immediately sent to the Westminster Police Department, and within minutes, patrol cars arrived at the scene. Emergency medical personnel and law enforcement officers quickly approached the victim. The young man was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, but tragically, he did not survive due to the severity of his injuries. A Thanksgiving meant for reunion and gratitude suddenly turned into an absolute tragedy. Returning to the scene, authorities urgently carried out forensic procedures. The parking lot was in complete chaos at the time, yet there were no signs of robbery, allowing police to promptly rule out robbery as a motive. All collected details indicated that this was a deliberate and organized attack. Investigators also paid particular attention to a mop handle that had been snapped in half and was lying nearby, most likely one of the weapons the group left behind after the assault. At the same time, the investigative team separated the witnesses who were present at the scene to take their statements. They were the victim's family members who had been shopping together on the holiday night. Based on the initial information, police identified the unfortunate teenage victim as Carrie T., 15 years old. According to witness accounts, just minutes before the incident, they encountered 4 unfamiliar young men outside the shopping center. At the time, when some of the family stepped out to the parking area for a break, this group of Asian youths approached and deliberately picked a fight. One of them stared them down and in a taunting tone jutted his chin and demanded, "What are you looking at?" Sensing the stranger's aggressive attitude, Sam, a member of the family, took the initiative to pull everyone away in silence and move elsewhere. The 4 men then walked off, but not before leaving behind a chilling name, Asian Crip. Although no one in the victim's family understood what Asian Crip meant, they felt uneasy and decided to leave the center and go home. However, as they had just stepped into the parking lot, the 4 men suddenly reappeared. One of them shouted, "Where are you from?" Meaning, "Which gang are you from?" Carrie's brother-in-law was terrified and hurriedly replied that they were just shoppers and did not belong to any gang. But before he could even finish his answer, one of the men lunged forward and kicked him directly. Immediately after a whistle rang out, more than a dozen shadowy figures rushed in from nowhere to join the 4 men, carrying sticks and glass bottles in their hands. Before they could even understand what was happening, Carrie's entire family was attacked in rapid succession. The assailants were extremely violent. Even after Carrie Tay had been beaten to the point of collapsing to the ground, they did not stop, but continued striking his head forcefully with hard objects. Based on the information gathered, the Westminster Police Department believed the case likely involved gang-related elements. For that reason, the initial direction of the investigation focused on Vietnamese criminal groups operating around the Little Saigon area. On the very night the incident happened, an intensive manhunt was launched. Police moved to block off roads around the Phuoc Loc Thot area, hoping to stop the suspects before they could get away. About 30 minutes later, a patrol unit spotted 5 suspicious young men loitering near the area across from the mall, and they were immediately detained for questioning. All 5 were Vietnamese American males in their 20s, with a rough, street-style appearance, leading police to suspect they might be connected to a local gang. However, after hours of tense interrogation, all 5 adamantly denied any involvement. They claimed they had only happened to be near the scene and denied taking part in the fight. In the end, with insufficient evidence to file charges, police had no choice but to release them after recording their identifying information. Despite continued efforts, the investigation gradually hit a dead end because no witness could identify a specific suspect. It was not until several weeks after the incident that investigators arranged for witnesses to review photo albums of known suspects from prominent gangs. There, a glimmer of hope appeared when the victim's older brother recognized a familiar face among the photos. He stated that this young man was the one who swung a long-handled stick to attack the family. In addition, another cousin recalled seeing the same young man standing on the roof of a car near where the victim collapsed, repeatedly bringing the stick down. Based on the information in the file, police identified the primary suspect as Trinh Huynh. However, that hope was quickly dampened during thorough follow-up questioning, as the witnesses admitted that because it was very dark and the scene was chaotic, they could not be absolutely certain. This made any arrest or prosecution extremely difficult. Moreover, Trinh Huynh's record had only been preserved from a prior theft case, which was not serious enough for police to track his current whereabouts. Even so, Trinh Huynh remained on investigators' radar. He was a Vietnamese American young man, about 19 years old, living in Santa Ana. Police believed Huynh may have been affiliated with the Asian Crips and connected to the case. But without direct evidence, the investigation remained stalled for many years. Just as the case seemed destined to fade into obscurity, an important turning point unexpectedly emerged. In the year 2008, Detective Tim Walker of the Westminster Police Department, an experienced investigator of cases within the Asian American community, happened to hear information related to the Thanksgiving night incident in the year 2001 while he was working a narcotics case. Those details immediately caught Walker's attention because he noticed that a phone number appearing in the narcotics case file matched a lead from the old homicide case. Walker decided to reopen the entire case file from the year 2001. He began cross-checking every smallest detail and obtained a court order to review data related to the suspicious phone number that had surfaced in the narcotics investigation. The results were startling. The phone number was registered under the name Thu Huynh, the older sister of Trinh Huynh. As he continued analyzing the call history, Walker discovered that during the time of the case in the year 2001, this number had contacted many different phone numbers. Most notably, it had communicated with the phone number of Jason Doe, a member of the Asian Crips gang. This data trail led to an alarming conclusion. Trinh Huynh had most likely used his sister's phone to contact gang members shortly before or after what happened at Asian Garden Mall. Detective Tim Walker immediately went to Huynh's residence in Santa Ana to question him, but at first, the suspect vehemently denied all allegations. Huynh appeared surprised when asked about the incident that occurred in the year 2001 and repeatedly denied ever being at Phuoc Loc Thot on Thanksgiving night that year. He even loudly insisted that he did not know what Asian Crips were. However, Detective Walker saw a very large AC tattoo on Huyhn's back, widely understood as an abbreviation for Asian Crips. Realizing the suspect was extremely cunning, Walker patiently applied sophisticated psychological tactics. Instead of rushing to make an immediate arrest, he repeatedly asked Huynh to come in for interviews, both to gather statements little by little and to wait for the suspect to slip up. In the sessions that followed, Walker began presenting the indirect evidence he had collected in order to apply intense psychological pressure. After several months of tense mind games, Huyhn's calm facade finally cracked. He started changing his story. From completely denying he had been at the scene, Huynh admitted he had been involved in the year 2001 incident while trying to minimize his role. He claimed he had only stood by watching and had thrown a few kicks during the fight, then ran when he heard his associates shouting. In particular, Huynh fabricated a detail that he had been summoned by an older gang member that night to collect a debt at Phuoc Loc Thot, attempting to portray the senseless attack as an act with a reason. However, investigators understood this was merely an unfounded excuse. In parallel with extracting Huyn's statement, Detective Walker quietly traced the other accomplices involved. Based on phone data and an informant network, he identified 3 other members of Asian Crips who had been present that night, including names such as Jason Doe and Frank Han. They were all prominent Vietnamese American youths in the local area. Once enough evidence had been gathered to support charges, the Westminster Police Department coordinated with the Orange County District Attorney's Office to obtain arrest warrants for the suspects. In July of the year 2009, nearly 8 years after the homicide, 4 arrest warrants were executed simultaneously. Trinh Huynh was personally taken into custody by Detective Walker, and 3 other accomplices from his gang were also arrested one by one. According to the investigation, Trinh Huynh was born around the year 1982 and was a Vietnamese American who grew up in the Little Saigon area. Even while still in school, Huynh frequently got into altercations and fights, which eventually led him to drop out. Later, the Tiny Rascal Gang, also known as Asian Crips, a notorious Asian criminal organization, recruited Huynh when he was only around 15 to 16 years old. Because he was tall and thin, older members gave him the nickname Bony, meaning skinny. Though still young, Huyn's reckless nature quickly made him known as a hothead in gang circles. Criminal records show that before the year 2001, Huynh had been arrested for theft and served a short jail sentence. However, after his release, he not only failed to reform, but sank even deeper into a life of crime. Huynh had many tattoos, the most notable being a very large AC on his back, a way of displaying pride in belonging to the Asian Crips. Former acquaintances recalled that Trinh Huynh had a very abrasive temper and was always looking for trouble to prove himself. He did not hesitate to use violence over even the smallest reasons. After taking the life of the teenager Carrie in the year 2001, Huynh had no intention of stopping. On the contrary, his involvement in that brutal incident seemed to become a trophy that elevated his name in the underworld. Just a few years later, Huynh was again implicated in a gang retaliation in the year 2005. According to court records, Huynh took part in hunting down a rival at Hydo restaurant in Westminster, stemming from money-related disputes as well as an earlier argument at the Shark Club nightclub. In this incident, Huynh carried a handgun and coldly shot and killed a young man named Dung Nguyen, while also injuring another person. Immediately after the killing, Huynh and his associates quickly fled in a car driven by an accomplice named Son Ngoc Nguyen. It was not until 2 years later that those involved in this case were formally charged, and Son Nguyen received a life sentence for his role as an especially dangerous accomplice. Although in the year 2010, Son's conviction was overturned by an appellate court because the evidence was not truly convincing, he still received a multi-year prison term on other charges. As for Trinh Huynh, the person who directly took the victim's life, he was not officially brought to justice until the year 2009. By the time he was arrested, Trinh Huynh had spent nearly a decade operating in the underworld of Little Saigon. His life appeared tightly bound to Vietnamese gangs, consumed by a spiral of wrongdoing. The trial of Trinh Huynh took place in the year 2010 at the Orange County Superior Court. In court, prosecutor Jim Mendelson was determined to convict Huynh of first-degree murder with a special circumstance, specifically that the crime was committed for the benefit of a gang. This allegation meant that if convicted, Huynh would face life in prison without the possibility of parole. One critically important part of the trial was the evidence related to a gang motive. The prosecutor called Detective Tim Walker as an expert on Asian gang crime to explain to the jury why Huyn's group targeted the victim's family even though the two sides had never known each other. Walker explained that in gang culture, the question, "Where are you from?" is a challenge demanding the other party declare their gang affiliation. The fact that Huyn's group turned violent immediately afterward showed they wanted to assert dominance and reinforce their influence over their territory. That compelling explanation silenced the courtroom, because everyone understood that the death of a 15-year-old boy was utterly senseless and brutally cruel, like a savage ritual for a gang to mark its territory. Meanwhile, Trinh Huyn's defense attorneys tried to raise doubts in an effort to turn the case around. They repeatedly pressed the witnesses and argued that there was no conclusive evidence proving Huynh was the one who directly inflicted the fatal injuries. However, the prosecution delivered sharp rebuttals, asserting that even if Huynh did not personally strike the victim, he was still responsible as an aider and abettor to first-degree murder. Moreover, Huynh faced an enhanced penalty because he brought and used dangerous weapons during the attack. During a recess, an incident occurred when an unknown man, believed to be a friend of Huynh, approached and deliberately stared at Carrie's mother with a sinister smile. The devastated woman was deeply shaken, and upon witnessing it, Detective Walker immediately reported the incident to court security. The man was promptly escorted out, and the judge issued a stern warning that jail time would be imposed on anyone who dared to threaten witnesses. The incident further highlighted the brazen nature of the gang Huynh was involved with, fueling even greater public outrage. After a tense, week-long trial, the proceedings finally came to an end. The jury formally found Trinh Huynh guilty of first-degree murder for the benefit of a gang, along with the charge of participating in a criminal street gang. At the same time, his use of dangerous weapons during the crime was also found to be an aggravating factor that increased the sentence. And so, after many years since Carrie's death, the teenager's family finally heard a guilty verdict for the person who helped take their child's life. In the solemn atmosphere of the courtroom, the judge officially sentenced Trinh Huynh to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 1-year jail term due to the use of a dangerous weapon. The moment she heard those words, Carrie's mother could not hold back her emotions. She covered her face and broke down in tears as justice was finally served. As expected, Trinh Huynh later filed an appeal. In the year 2012, his attorney cited reasons such as alleged prosecutorial unfairness and ineffective assistance by his original defense counsel in an attempt to overturn the conviction. However, after careful review, the California Court of Appeal rejected all of these arguments and upheld the life sentence for Trinh Huynh. It seemed the story had ended there, but in the year 2019, Trinh Huynh again tried to take advantage of a new law that allowed certain accomplices, those who did not directly commit the killing, to seek resentencing review. He submitted a petition hoping his conviction could be reduced. Yet in the year 2023, after multiple hearings and thorough consideration, the appellate court ruled that he was not eligible for leniency or a reduced sentence. As of now, at the age of 44, Trinh Huynh is still serving his sentence in a California state prison. This case sounded a powerful alarm within the community about the need to work together to push back against criminal gang activity. Vietnamese community organizations began cooperating more closely with law enforcement and encouraged residents to report any suspicious signs around them. Many anti-gang workshops were also organized to support parents in paying closer attention to and better guiding their teenage children. What do you think we should do to help young people stay away from the influence of criminal gangs? On the night of the 6th of May, 1999, passers-by in the El Monte area of California were suddenly shocked to see a panicked crowd fleeing the International Club nightclub. Almost simultaneously, the El Monte Police Department's emergency hotline continuously received multiple calls reporting a shooting inside the club. Just minutes later, police officers quickly arrived at the scene. Inside the International Club was a chaotic and grim sight. Gun smoke still lingered beneath the dim neon lights, unfinished music played faintly, while the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the metallic scent of blood filled the air. Right next to the large pool table in the center of the hall was a round table covered in bloodstains. On the chairs and the floor around it, 4 victims lay collapsed in different positions. 3 men had died on the spot from multiple gunshot wounds, while a young woman was barely alive and was urgently transported to the hospital by emergency responders. The gunshot wound locations on the victims' bodies indicated that the attacker acted with clear intent and absolute decisiveness. The shooting angle, coming from the front and slightly downward, showed that the gunman stood directly opposite the table where the victims were seated. The clean bullet wounds demonstrated that the shooter carefully aimed at each target rather than firing randomly. The crime scene also showed no signs of a prolonged struggle. Everything happened in a flash, within approximately 10 to 15 seconds. As evidenced by the fact that only 10 shell casings were found, and most of the victims remained seated in their original positions at the corner table. On the floor, authorities recovered 10.45 caliber shell casings, all fired from the same semi-automatic handgun. This detail suggests that there was most likely only a single gunman responsible for the shooting. In addition, no signs were found indicating that any other weapons were used at the scene. However, when examining the body of one male victim, investigators discovered a .40 caliber handgun concealed in the back of his waistband, but the weapon had not been fired. This finding immediately raised suspicions that the incident was very likely a targeted hit carried out between criminal groups. At the scene, the victims' identities were quickly confirmed through identification documents and statements from witnesses inside the nightclub. The first victim was identified as Min Jiu Chum, 28 years old, residing in West Covina. Min was known as a member of the Black Dragon Gang, relatively well known within the Vietnamese community, and he was also the person who brought a gun into the international club on the night of the incident. Based on the initial assessment, he was most likely the primary target the perpetrator intended to kill, because the other three victims appeared to have no clear ties to any criminal factions. The autopsy results showed that Min was struck by a fatal bullet to the back of the head, along with 3 additional close-range shots to the torso. The bullet trajectory indicated a downward angle of impact, strongly suggesting that the shooter was standing very close behind the victim. After the first shot, the suspect continued aiming at Min's ribs and chest as he collapsed, indicating a decisive act carried out with prior calculation. The next victim was Hao Tae Tong, 22 years old, living in El Monte. He was part of the group seated at the same table with Min on the night of the shooting. According to witness accounts, Hao was likely only a casual friend within the group and stayed at the table that evening simply to socialize. When the shooting occurred, Hao was seated right next to Min and was hit by 4 bullets, including one to the temple. Lan Thi Dang, 23 years old, a Vietnamese woman from Long Beach, was the only female victim in the incident. That night, Lan and her older sister drove for nearly an hour to El Monte to attend the birthday of Hiet Diep, the nightclub manager, at her invitation. When the atmosphere in the club became tense due to an argument, Lan and her sister were invited by John Bui, the club's co-owner, to sit at his table to avoid trouble. But tragically, that very table became the one that absorbed the full burst of gunfire. Lan was hit by a bullet that passed through her arm and then pierced straight into her chest. She was rushed to the hospital immediately afterward, but her injuries were too severe, and she took her last breath at the hospital. The victim, Robert Anthony Norman, 20 years old, was a young man from Garden Grove. According to witnesses, Robert knew the Dunk sisters and had nothing to do with any conflict between gang groups. When the gunfire suddenly erupted, he tried to lower himself and crawl outside to escape. But in that moment of chaos, the perpetrator still acted with chilling composure, firing an additional shot from behind, killing Robert almost instantly. The victims' deaths left behind a deeply painful tragedy, and the public was outraged and shocked by the sheer brutality of the crime. Immediately after the scene was secured, a special investigative team from the Los Angeles Police Department was mobilized, working alongside El Monte police to collect witness statements throughout the night. However, the initial investigation faced major obstacles due to the fear and hesitation of those who were present. International Club was not merely an entertainment venue, it was also considered a hangout for underworld figures. As a result, many witnesses were reluctant to cooperate, afraid of possible retaliation. Hiet Diep, the manager who had organized the birthday celebration that night, initially gave evasive statements. He denied witnessing any fight or knowing the shooter's identity. Hiet Diep also insisted that there was no videotape capturing the shooting, even though the nightclub had surveillance cameras installed. Even so, investigators continued persistently, working to reconstruct the entire sequence of events. From the witnesses who agreed to speak, investigators gradually pieced together a relatively clear narrative. About 10 to 15 minutes before the shooting, a major argument broke out near the nightclub's restroom area. The dispute initially involved Anthony Chun, a member of Hiet Diep's friend group, and approximately 3 to 4 unfamiliar Asian men. After that, Min Chum, believed to be connected to the Black Dragon Gang, also joined the confrontation on his side. As tensions escalated, staff members and John Boy had to step in to separate the two groups. John recalled that he led Min Chum back to sit at his table to calm things down, while the opposing group returned to a table near the restroom area. Later, John Boy said he saw a figure approach and suddenly pull out a gun. He only had time to spring up and try to grab the man's arm to stop him, but he was immediately thrown to the floor. Out of John's reach, the gunman continued firing until he ran out of ammunition, then quickly fled the scene. These statements suggest that the motive for the shooting was likely directly connected to the earlier argument between Min Chum and the unfamiliar group. Witnesses described the leader of that group as an Asian man in his 20s, heavyset, commonly known by the nickname Fat John. That name immediately caught the attention of seasoned detectives because it had appeared in several intelligence reports related to local gangs. Police quickly began screening criminal records to identify individuals with the same name or a similar nickname. It did not take long for them to pinpoint a standout name: An Tay Duong, 24 years old, Vietnamese, residing in Costa Mesa, a city about 40 miles south of El Monte. In the local underworld, he was also known by the nickname Fat John. A background review showed that An Tay Duong had previously been suspected of involvement in a series of armed robberies and homicides across multiple areas in California between 1997 and 1998. He was suspected of killing someone during a robbery at a Vietnamese-owned store in San Jose in 1997, and of being linked to a similar incident in Fremont in 1998. Both robberies carried out in a reckless and brazen manner. From these leads, police quietly approached several informants within the Vietnamese community to gather more information. One of them was T. Van Lê, a young man who had been at the International Club on the night of the incident. Few people knew that T was actually a confidential police informant because of earlier involvement in a separate drug-related case. At first, T appeared hesitant and cautious when working with investigators. However, faced with the evidence police already had, he was forced to provide several key details. According to T's statement, he personally heard An Tay Duong arguing with Min Chum in the restroom area. Not long after that, T also heard An Tay Duong whisper in Chinese to the person next to him about whether they should deal with Min right then and there. That detail sent a chill through investigators, because it suggested the intent to act had formed in the suspect's mind beforehand rather than being a spontaneous outburst. T also stated that after the shooting, Huynh Diep went to the home of a friend named Huynh to retrieve the surveillance tape that recorded what happened that night and then had it destroyed. Based on this statement, police believed Huynh Diep likely feared being implicated with gang elements and therefore helped conceal the perpetrator. In parallel with collecting testimony, technical specialists also began their work. Mobile phone data showed that in the early morning of the following day, the numbers belonging to Anthony Chun, Huynh Diep, a man named Duc Nguyen from the party group, and several lines registered under An Tay Duong's girlfriend had been in frequent contact with one another. This dense chain of calls indicated that Huyth's group knew exactly who the shooter was and had discussed the situation after the incident. With the evidence becoming increasingly clear, Huynh Diep was finally forced to admit that An Tay Duong was the gunman, and he claimed that the argument that night appeared to be connected to a woman at another bar. However, when authorities raided the address where An Tay Duong lived in Costa Mesa, he had already fled in time. Soon afterward, a special nationwide warrant was issued. In December 1999, the Los Angeles Police Department publicly released An Tay Duong's name and photograph through the media, urging the public to provide information to assist in his capture. The manhunt continued into the year 2000. A dedicated task force to track down An Tay Duong was launched with the coordination of multiple agencies, including the Los Angeles Police Department, the Orange County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI, because the suspect was connected to several matters under federal jurisdiction. In April 2000, An Tay Duong's case was featured on the nationally televised program America's Most Wanted in order to seek public assistance and information. Leads began to surface in mid-2001 when the FBI received word that An Tay Duong had reappeared in Orange County. After a period in hiding, the suspect appeared to have returned to California and began trying to reconnect with accomplices to carry out brazen robberies in familiar territory. From there, police began surveilling An Tay Duong's girlfriend, Christine Kai Men Chen, 19 years old, along with several close associates, and gradually determined that he was hiding in the Costa Mesa area. After weeks of surveillance and staking out, on the late afternoon of the 16th of July, 2001, a task force suddenly stormed the 24-hour fitness gym on Anton Boulevard. At that moment, An Tay Duong was playing basketball on the court, completely unaware that his days on the run were about to come to an end. When officers shouted for everyone to get down, An Tay Duong dropped to the floor like everyone else. Facing police guns, he had no choice but to comply and place his hands in cuffs without any chance to react. During a quick search of An Tae-seung and the Ford Expedition SUV he was using, police seized multiple key pieces of evidence. Among them were a fake ID under the name Long Hwang but bearing An Tae-seung's photograph, a fully loaded .45 caliber handgun, and multiple credit cards issued under false names as well as under his girlfriend's name. When searching the residence of An Tae-seung and his girlfriend in Costa Mesa, authorities also discovered another .45 caliber firearm along with a large cache of stored ammunition, indicating that he had been preparing for future jobs. Immediately after his arrest, An Tae-seung was extradited to Los Angeles to face 4 first-degree murder charges related to the international club case. Around the same time, police from multiple other jurisdictions also came forward to question him about other unresolved cases. According to investigative records, An Tae-seung was suspected of killing at least 6 people in a crime spree that lasted 5 years. At this point, the prosecution's top priority was to bring him to trial first for the El Monte case, in order to obtain justice for the 4 victims, and, at the same time, permanently remove an exceptionally dangerous individual from the community. According to investigative files, An Tae-seung was born around 1974 to 1975 in Vietnam. He immigrated to the United States with his family as a child and settled in Orange County, California. The nickname Fat John came from his short, somewhat heavy-set build. However, in stark contrast to that appearance, An Tae-seung was described as cold-blooded and reckless. He had bragged about making money through gambling and armed robberies, even treating it as a way to earn a living. After joining the Lau family, an Indo-Chinese criminal organization, An Tae-seung quickly rose as a young leader due to his boldness and skilled use of firearms. Criminal records also show that before the El Monte incident, An Tae-seung had already been involved in multiple serious crimes. On the 3rd of May, 1997, in San Jose, he and his accomplices ambushed Mr. Thien Tung, the owner of a Vietnamese supermarket, to steal a cash bag worth 300,000 USD that had just been withdrawn from the bank. During the attack, An Tae-seung shot Mr. Thien in the leg and then took the money. When Mr. Thien's father-in-law, Mr. Cho Quat, 66 years old, ran out to chase them, An Tae-seung struck again, killing the elderly man in the middle of the street. After this incident, he was wanted on multiple serious charges, including homicide, armed robbery, and attempted homicide. Next, in August 1998, in Fremont, Northern California, An Tae-seung took part in a robbery targeting the computer equipment business Wintech Industries. In that incident, one of his accomplices shot and wounded a security guard, while Soo Pin Sai, a company employee, was killed as he attempted to drive away from the scene. According to investigators, An Tae-seung was the one who fired the shot that killed Mr. Sai and then quickly escaped. With 2 major crimes occurring back-to-back in 1997 and 1998, An Tae-seung was placed on the FBI's federal wanted list on the charge of unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. After the 4-person massacre in El Monte in 1999, instead of disappearing completely, An Tae-seung continued committing crimes with increasing boldness. He planned robberies targeting high-end jewelry stores with an organized criminal group. In January 2001, An Tae-seung and his accomplices attacked the Torno watch store at South Coast Plaza in Orange County, and were also linked to a shooting at Traditional Jewelers in Newport Beach, where security guard Rafael Gomez was critically injured but survived after multiple surgeries. Just 2 months later, in March 2001, An Tae-seung again led an armed group equipped with rifles, storming the Jade Galore jewelry store in Cupertino near San Jose. In this incident, security guard Josefino Cambosa was killed, and the group stole watches valued at approximately 53,000 USD. This string of repeated offenses showed that An Tae-seung was exceptionally reckless and greedy, willing to harm innocent people to achieve financial goals or satisfy personal motives. In the El Monte incident, he had no prior acquaintance with, nor any personal grudge against, 3 of the 4 victims. The motive was believed to stem from multiple intertwined factors, including simmering resentment or conflict between An Tae-seung's group and the Black Dragon gang led by Min. Some statements also claim that the initial argument began over a girl, along with old tensions at a bar called Passions. In that context, Anh Tae-seung chose to strike first, targeting Min to eliminate a perceived threat and to send a message. The fact that he continued shooting the others seated at the same table showed cold calculation, possibly to silence witnesses or retaliate against the entire group. In his personal life, Anh Tae-seung was romantically involved with Christine Kai-men Chen, a 19-year-old Chinese woman. Christine was both his girlfriend and, unwillingly, an accomplice. She admitted that she had repeatedly accompanied Anh Tae-seung to scout targets before each job. Anh Tae-seung taught his girlfriend how to observe a store, memorize a security guard's routine, and assess risk levels. Christine also stated that in their shared apartment, Anh Tae-seung always kept a large cache of weapons, and he frequently justified that robberies were the only way he could make a living. He even bragged about his operating rules: move fast, cover his face, wear dark clothing, and leave in under a few dozen seconds. Under his control and psychological pressure, Christine lived in fear but still felt forced to comply and keep everything secret. While hiding after the El Monte incident, Anh Tae-seung mainly stayed at Christine's home, alternating with a number of other locations arranged by friends to evade the police. Edward Mukasa, a close friend of Anh Tae-seung, and Christine were later arrested on charges of harboring a murder suspect for sheltering him for more than 2 years. These details showed that Anh Tae-seung had a fairly loyal network, people willing to help him hide and even assist in covering up evidence, similar to how Hiet Diep had taken the videotape and destroyed it. From a psychological perspective, based on court records, Anh Tae-seung appeared cold-blooded and showed little to no sign of remorse. In September 2001, he attempted to take his own life in jail but failed. Even so, when he appeared in court, Anh Tae-seung maintained an unnervingly indifferent demeanor. He refused to be present for the jury's sentencing decision, and according to his attorney, when informed that prosecutors were seeking the death penalty, Anh Tae-seung displayed almost no emotion. The case against Anh Tae-seung went to trial in January 2003 at the Pomona Superior Court in Los Angeles, nearly 4 years after the massacre, and it quickly became one of the most closely watched criminal trials in California in the early 2000s. The defendant was charged with 4 counts of murder, including 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of second-degree murder. During the trial, there was testimony suggesting that a second armed person might have been inside the nightclub. However, that testimony was inconsistent and was not supported by any physical evidence. The investigation concluded that only Anh Tae-seung's gun was used throughout the incident, so the second shooter theory was quickly dismissed. At first, the defense strategy was for Anh Tae-seung to testify on his own behalf, claiming that he fired in self-defense and that the others were hit accidentally. However, when the court allowed the prosecution to introduce his prior violent incidents if he chose to take the stand, Anh Tae-seung changed his decision and chose to remain silent. After arguments concluded, the jury swiftly found Anh Tae-seung guilty on all charges. On the 10th of February, 2003, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty, and on the 7th of March, 2003, the judge formally imposed the sentence. Under California law, the verdict was automatically forwarded to the state Supreme Court for appellate review. In August 2020, after 17 years of review, the Supreme Court rejected all appeals and upheld the original judgment, affirming that the trial process was fair and showed no signs of wrongful conviction. However, the legal landscape changed in late 2022, when the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office, under a policy of not pursuing the death penalty, agreed to withdraw the death sentence for Anh Tae-seung. The court then approved vacating the death sentence and resentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. All of Anh Tae-seung's subsequent appeal efforts produced no results. After more than 2 decades, the case ended with a permanent life sentence. The perpetrator escaped execution, but will never have the chance to return to a free life. The International Club massacre carried out by Anh Tae-seung left a horrific mark on the Vietnamese community in California. 4 lives were taken unjustly, bringing pain and shattering multiple families. At the time, the case drew intense media attention, with local outlets such as the Los Angeles Times reporting on it extensively, while America's Most Wanted also helped support the manhunt. The public was not only stunned by the severity of the crime, but also deeply worried about the reality of gang activity seeping into immigrant communities. Many Vietnamese Americans at the time fell into a state of shock and shame, and feared that the image of the entire community would be stained by crimes like those associated with Antezum. On the other hand, the case also exposed disturbing realities worth reflecting on: hesitation, fear, and in some instances, even people assisting criminals. This sounded an alarm about a culture of silence that had quietly taken root within parts of the immigrant community, making the investigation and the effort to bring the perpetrator to light far more difficult. Beyond that, in terms of social impact, the case caused widespread fear at Vietnamese entertainment venues in the area. After the incident, the authorities reviewed International Club's business license, and it ultimately had to shut down permanently. Many nearby karaoke lounges and billiards halls were also forced to tighten security, install additional cameras, and hire stricter security guards in order to reassure customers and reduce risk. What do you think was a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, truly appropriate for someone suspected of taking at least 6 lives? On Monday morning, April 3rd, 2017, traffic and pedestrians were moving through the intersection of Peachtree Street and Peachtree Place, one of the busiest crossings in the heart of Midtown. Suddenly, at around 7:40 a.m., a rapid burst of gunshots rang out, leaving people startled and stunned. When the shock subsided, everyone was horrified to realize that a woman had collapsed in the street. She lay on the crosswalk, blood spreading across the asphalt. People screamed in panic. Some rushed to help the victim, while others quickly called 911 to report it to the police. A few people who worked nearby were stunned to recognize the victim as attorney Trinh, who was often seen participating in local community activities. Just minutes later, first responders and an ambulance arrived. Trinh lay motionless on the crosswalk, with her handbag and personal belongings scattered beside her. Although she was still barely breathing, her condition was extremely critical. Trinh was rushed to the nearby Grady Memorial Hospital, but tragically, she did not survive due to the severity of her injuries. The incident quickly shocked the Vietnamese community in Atlanta, not only because of how ruthless and cold-blooded the attack was, but also because the victim was a prominent figure in the community. Trinh, whose full name was Huynh Hong Trinh, was born in 1976 in Vietnam. When she was 3 years old, her family decided to immigrate to Gainesville, Georgia, in the United States. Trin's childhood essentially began from zero in a foreign land, but she adapted quickly and stood out. She attended Gainesville's public school system and soon distinguished herself through outstanding academic performance. At Gainesville High School, she was not only among the top students, graduating 3rd in her class in 1994, but also served as student body president, showing leadership qualities from a very young age. Thanks to her impressive achievements, Trinh was admitted to Princeton University, one of the most prestigious schools in New Jersey. While studying there, she remained deeply involved in extracurricular activities and served as president of the university's Vietnamese Student Association, along with holding roles in other social organizations. Trinh graduated from Princeton in 1998 with a bachelor's degree in history, then spent an entire year back in Vietnam through the Princeton in Asia program, teaching English to students as a way to give back to her homeland. In 1999, Trinh returned to the United States and worked in Atlanta for a period before enrolling at Emory University School of Law. She earned her Juris Doctor and officially became an attorney in 2004. Trinh began her legal career at Powell Goldstein in a group handling government construction contracts, then moved to Alston and Bird, a major and highly respected law firm. In the following years, she served as legal counsel at the Gibson Law Firm. And in 2011, Trinh decided to open her own practice and work independently. Alongside her rising career, Trinh had another great passion: travel and exploration. In 2010, she chose to step away from work for nearly 2 years to travel around the world, visiting multiple continents, making friends everywhere, and experiencing new places. After returning to Atlanta with renewed energy, Trinh worked for a time as a contract attorney for the Coca-Cola Company. Then, in the summer of 2016, she joined the legal team at UPS. There, Trinh served as in-house counsel, specializing in contracts and legal advisory work for the company. In less than a year, she made a strong impression through her talent and dedication. Beyond her professional accomplishments, Trinh was deeply loved by her family, friends, and colleagues. People remembered her as lively, witty, and compassionate. Even with a demanding workload, she still made time for volunteer work and community building programs. Trinh served as president of the Princeton Alumni Association in Georgia, sat on the board of the Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association, GAPABA, and actively supported young Asian American attorneys in the community. She also volunteered as a coach for Grady High School's mock trial team in Atlanta for 10 years, inspiring and guiding generations of students. Not only that, Trinh also served on the advisory board of the Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, which provides free legal services to immigrant victims of human trafficking or domestic violence. Despite being so actively involved, Trinh was extremely humble. Many of the good deeds she had done were only discovered by her family when friends and colleagues shared stories at her memorial service. That is why so many people were heartbroken to learn that on the morning of April 3rd, 2017, Trinh was attacked on her ordinary commute to work. She was walking to the MARTA transit station to catch a train to the UPS headquarters when she was suddenly targeted. Trinh Huynh life and character showed that she was talented, kind, and full of passion. That is also why her being attacked in broad daylight became a massive shock to everyone who knew her. Trinh had virtually no significant personal conflicts, no debts, no feuds, no romantic entanglements, and no ties to the criminal world. When every possible motive led to a dead end, investigators were forced to focus entirely on the crime scene evidence and witness statements in order to trace the perpetrator. Immediately after the incident, the Atlanta Police Department mobilized its best criminal investigators to hunt down the killer. At the scene, investigators quickly recovered 3 handgun shell casings, confirming that the victim had been shot multiple times at close range from behind. Police also concluded right away that this was not a robbery, because the victim's watch and wallet were still there, and there were no signs of a struggle or missing property. They then swiftly sealed off the entire area and began interviewing witnesses. Witnesses said the attacker approached the victim, suddenly opened fire, and then immediately left the scene without saying a word or having any other interaction with her. Some clearly remembered the suspect as a man wearing a dark hooded jacket, moving with a calmness that felt almost cold. Surveillance footage made the case even more chilling. After shooting the victim down, the man still walked away unhurriedly, blending into the crowd as if nothing had happened. That level of composure led police to believe this was a premeditated killing rather than an impulsive act. After pulling footage from cameras around the Peachtree Street intersection, investigators saw a man wearing a black hoodie, shorts, and a hood pulled tightly over his head, lingering behind Trinh Huynh for several minutes before the shooting. At the moment of the attack, he moved quickly from behind, raised his arm, and fired several shots at Trinh before running off. His movements, running style, and clothing were all captured fairly clearly on camera. By noon on April 3rd, 2017, just a few hours after the incident, the Atlanta Police Department decided to release a clip of the surveillance video to the media and called on the public to help identify the suspect. While waiting for information from the community, investigators continued quietly analyzing every detail they had gathered. And surprisingly, the investigative team discovered that this murder might be connected to another incident that happened just 1 day earlier. Specifically, on April 2nd, also in Midtown Atlanta, there was a knife attack that left 2 people seriously injured. It occurred at a construction site at 1180 West Peachtree Street, only a few blocks from the shooting scene. The victims were construction workers. They reported that they had been stabbed by a coworker after a conflict and that the attacker fled the site. Atlanta police quickly identified the suspect in that incident as Raylon Lee Browning, 39 years old, a resident of Roswell, a northern suburb of Atlanta. On the night of April 2nd, an arrest warrant was issued for Browning on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. At first, almost no one believed the stabbing could be related to the shooting the next day, because the victims in the earlier incident knew Browning personally, while attorney Trinh Huynh appeared to have no connection to him at all. However, a detective assigned to the April 2nd case noticed that Browning's face and build looked very similar to the man seen in the surveillance footage at the Peachtree Street intersection. The detective immediately notified the homicide unit to cross-check. Around the same time, the Crime Stoppers hotline also received an anonymous call, and the tipster likewise stated that the name Raylon Browning was the person in the video. And so, within half a day, from the afternoon into the evening of April 3rd, the Atlanta Police Department had a highly promising name for the prime suspect in the case involving attorney Trinh Huynh. But just before investigators could move in to make an arrest, Raylon Browning brought himself into the net. At around 9 p.m. on April 3rd, in Cobb County, a suburban area bordering Atlanta, a patrol officer spotted a car running a red light. The officer signaled the driver to pull over and asked for identification. After checking the information, he discovered that the driver was Raylon Lee Browning, the man wanted in Atlanta in connection with the serious stabbing case. Browning was immediately detained, handcuffed, and taken to the Cobb County Police Station. At first, Cobb County authorities only knew they had captured a wanted suspect from the stabbing the day before. However, after coordinating with the Atlanta Police Department, they learned that Browning was also a suspect in the murder of attorney Trinh Huynh that had occurred earlier that same morning. Upon closer inspection, Cobb County Police noticed that Browning was still wearing the same pair of khaki shorts and the same athletic shoes that matched the suspect seen in the video being repeatedly aired on television. When they searched the vehicle Browning was driving, officers also found a 9mm handgun hidden under the seat, believed to be the weapon used to kill Trinh Huynh. In addition, the car contained a black hoodie similar to the clothing worn by the man in the surveillance footage. All of this key evidence was immediately turned over to the Atlanta Police Department. The next morning, on April 4th, 2017, during a press conference, the Atlanta police chief officially announced that the #1 suspect, Raylon Lee Browning, had been arrested. In less than 24 hours after the shocking Midtown shooting, Atlanta police had obtained a decisive lead thanks to a chance traffic stop and coordinated interagency cooperation. The man who opened fire on the streets of Midtown was not a stranger at all, but the very person wanted in connection with the stabbing attack just one day earlier. Although Raylon Browning was captured quickly, the investigation still could not be closed. The next step for authorities was to solidify the evidence needed to bring him to court. Atlanta officials sent the handgun recovered from Browning's car for forensic testing. The results showed that bullets fired from that gun matched the shell casings collected at the scene of the incident involving Trinh Huynh. This finding strongly reinforced the conclusion that it was the murder weapon. At the same time, direct witnesses were asked to identify Browning. Several people who had been at the intersection that morning after viewing Browning's photo confirmed that he was the man they saw at the scene. Police continued collecting data on Browning's movements through cell phone signals and traffic camera footage. That data showed that on the morning of April 3rd, he was in the Midtown area near where the shooting occurred. And by that evening, he drove out of Atlanta, heading north, along the same route that led to the location in Cobb County where he was stopped. All evidence gathered helped clearly map Browning's movements during the critical time period. As soon as Browning was arrested, detectives interrogated him to determine whether he had any grudge against Trinh Huynh and why he would kill a woman in broad daylight on a public street. The result shocked everyone. Browning and Trinh had no prior relationship whatsoever. They lived in different environments, worked in unrelated fields, had no personal disputes, and did not share any indirect connections. That made the biggest question even harder to answer. Why did Browning target Trinh? Many theories were raised afterward. It was possible he was in a disturbed state and chose a random target. It was also possible he held an unfounded bias against Asian women. Or simply, Trinh was the unfortunate person who happened to cross Browning's path while he was in an agitated state. Police did not rule out the possibility of mental illness, especially after observing Browning's abnormal behavior following his arrest. Specifically, at the Fulton County Jail, where Browning was being held while awaiting court, there was an incident in which he suddenly lunged into a confrontation with another inmate for no clear reason. After being placed in isolation, he then harmed himself by biting his own arm. These signs forced authorities to request multiple mental health evaluations of Browning throughout the legal proceedings. So, who was Raylon Lee Browning? Details about this 39-year-old man gradually emerged after his arrest. Browning was born in 1977 and was a local resident of Roswell, Georgia, a relatively quiet suburb north of Atlanta. Before 2017, Browning had a few minor prior offenses, but none involving serious violence. That was precisely what made his sudden, dangerous actions over 2 consecutive days even harder to explain. According to some information, at the time of the incidents, Browning was unemployed or working only temporary jobs. There were reports that he had worked as a construction laborer in Midtown Atlanta, which could explain why he knew the 2 victims injured in the April 2nd stabbing, since they were co-workers on the same site. People who had interacted with Browning described him as rude and quick-tempered. In fact, police records noted that during previous arrests, Browning often acted confrontationally toward officers. Even so, no one imagined he would go so far as to attack a complete stranger in this way. It must be emphasized again that Browning had no social connection whatsoever to Trinh Huynh. This led many to suspect that his mental state was seriously troubled. The theory that Browning was suffering from a neurological disorder or paranoia was raised. However, later medical evaluations determined that he was still competent to be held legally responsible. Throughout the proceedings, Browning offered no explanation or defense for his actions. He remained sullen and almost emotionless, making the motive behind the case even more difficult to predict. Some criminology experts suggested that Browning's sequence of actions fit the pattern of an impulsive attacker in an agitated or disordered state. He committed consecutive attacks, chose random targets, made no effort to conceal his actions, and did not attempt to flee far. It took nearly 8 years from the day of the crime for Raylon Browning to finally go to trial. The proceedings dragged on because Browning was repeatedly ordered to undergo mental health evaluations, along with delays caused by legal procedures and court backlogs during the COVID-19 period in 2020 and 2021. It was not until late 2024 that the Fulton County Court opened Browning's trial on charges including malice murder, felony murder, possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime, and aggravated assault. Trinh Huynh's family, along with many friends, colleagues, and members of the Vietnamese community in Atlanta, attended the trial, patiently waiting for justice to be served. In court, prosecutors emphasized that Browning was fully aware and clear-minded when he carried out this series of acts. He deliberately brought a weapon, chose the moment to strike, and then calmly walked away from the scene. All of it showed that Browning clearly understood what he was doing and was not out of control. Faced with an overwhelming amount of evidence, Browning's defense attorney had little ground to challenge the case. Browning himself remained silent and offered no explanation for his motive. The defense's only strategy was to argue that Browning suffered from mental illness. They presented his history of psychological instability and cited the fact that he had undergone multiple psychiatric evaluations, suggesting that the defendant may not have fully understood his actions at the time of the crime. However, the court rejected an insanity defense because forensic experts concluded that Browning was competent to be held criminally responsible and he had not used any intoxicating substances at the time of the offense. The jury was therefore instructed to focus on the facts. Raylon Browning intentionally killed Trinh Huynh, and there were no significant mitigating circumstances. After about 1 week of intense trial proceedings, the jury deliberated for only a short time. The outcome was not surprising. Raylon Lee Browning was found guilty on all charges, including malice murder. When the verdict was announced, many people in the courtroom could not hold back their tears. Trinh Huynh's family, after nearly 8 years of enduring the pain of loss, finally heard the firm judgment against the man who caused this tragedy. The judge then handed down Browning's sentence. At 47 years old, he received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. That meant Browning would have no chance to return to society, and the rest of his life would be spent behind bars. For attorney Trinh Huynh's family, this was considered a fitting punishment for the man who caused them such immense pain. The murder of Trinh Huynh came to an end when the suspect was punished under the law, but its impact still lingered throughout the community. Trinh's death was an irreplaceable loss for her family, friends, colleagues, and the many people she had helped. A few days after the shooting, hundreds of people gathered at the Midtown corner where Trinh had fallen to attend a prayer vigil in her memory. Thankfully, her passing was not forgotten. The Georgia Asian Pacific American Bar Association, where she had been deeply involved, established the Trinh Huynh Scholarship in 2017 to honor her and support law students who aspire to serve the community. Trinh's colleagues at UPS also created an annual charity initiative in her name, aimed at helping immigrants and women in need, reflecting the very spirit Trinh lived by. What do you think about Browning's motive? Do you believe there may have been some connection between him and the victim that no one ever knew about? At approximately 7:25 p.m. on the 31st day of August, 2012, Seattle's 911 dispatch received an emergency call from the area near Roosevelt Reservoir. The caller reported a vehicle pulled over to the side of the road with the driver lying motionless inside, suggesting a shooting had occurred. Just minutes after the report, police and emergency responders arrived at the scene, a quiet residential neighborhood near the intersection of 75th Street and 15th Avenue. According to two witnesses, Kevin Watts and Angelo Rama, not long before that, as they were driving through the area, they suddenly heard 5 consecutive bangs coming from behind them. When they looked back, they saw a silver sports car speeding through the intersection despite the red light, then swerving into oncoming lanes before quickly disappearing. Sensing something was wrong, the two decided to accelerate and chase after it. However, the mysterious car surged to 100 kilometers per hour within just 2 to 3 seconds, and they were unable to catch up. They then returned to the scene and found a red Subaru parked along the roadside, with the engine still running. Both men had a terrible feeling and suspected the noises they had heard were gunshots. That suspicion was quickly confirmed when they saw the driver inside, motionless and severely wounded. As authorities began securing the area, Patricia Schulmeister, a 92-year-old resident who lived near the intersection, stepped outside to report what she had discovered. She said she had just heard an unusually loud bang from outside, and when she checked inside her home, she was horrified to find a stray bullet lying right on her living room floor. According to the elderly woman, the object pierced through a wooden fence and then through a window, shattering a lamp and ricocheting off a picture frame before landing on the carpet. Recognizing how serious the situation was, Schulmeister carefully kept the bullet and personally handed it to police at the scene to assist the investigation. When first responders and investigators approached the Subaru, its headlights were still on, and inside was a middle-aged man who had already died. The initial examination determined that the victim had been struck by 4 shots at close range. While the 5th shot missed and flew into the neighborhood, this was the same bullet Schulmeister had found earlier. When officers examined the victim's car more closely, they found the driver's side window fully lowered, yet there were numerous shards of broken glass scattered across the roadway. After analysis and forensic testing, investigators concluded that this glass actually came from the passenger side window of the shooter's vehicle. This meant the killer had remained inside his own car and fired through the closed passenger side window, with the bullets striking the victim in the adjacent vehicle. It was an extremely unusual act, as the perpetrator was willing to shatter his own car window in order to carry out the crime. From the 2 witnesses' accounts, police gathered an initial description of the suspect's vehicle: a silver convertible BMW Roadster with 2 seats, possibly a Z3 or Z4, with a distinctive set of bright, polished alloy wheels. In addition, witness Kevin Watts, who managed to look into the car as it sped past, remained calm enough to work with a forensic sketch artist to recreate the suspect's face. The sketch depicted a young man with fair skin, short black hair, and oversized aviator-style sunglasses, with a face that appeared quite youthful. Based on these leads, Seattle police immediately issued a citywide alert to locate the suspect, and asked the public to report any silver BMW Z3 or Z4 with a missing passenger side window. While searching for the suspicious vehicle, police also worked to confirm the victim's identity through identification documents found on his person and inside the car. The unfortunate man was Yancey Sean Knoll, 42 years old, a Seattle resident who lived not far from the crime scene. Further investigation showed that Yancey was a wine specialist at the QFC grocery store in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. Beyond his love of wine and craft beer, he was also an experienced climber. Friends said he often drove his beloved dog, Lola, in his Subaru so they could go on long road trips together. Yancey was also described as someone who lived simply, always attached to his old Subaru and rarely concerned with appearances. A longtime friend remarked that he drove very carefully and always had a calm temperament, never hot-headed or impulsive, and certainly never aggressive towards strangers. Everyone who had known Yancey insisted that he had no enemies and had never picked fights with anyone, which only made his sudden death even more baffling to investigators. Notably, from the beginning, police suspected that a dent on the Subaru's front bumper might have been evidence of a minor collision that escalated into a conflict. However, a close friend of the victim confirmed that the dent had been there for a long time and was completely unrelated to this case. As a result, the motive remained a major unanswered question. From the earliest days, Yancey Knoll's case posed a difficult puzzle for Seattle police. Just days after they asked the public for information, hundreds of calls flooded the tip line, offering all kinds of leads about dark-haired men driving silver convertible BMWs. This wave of tips forced authorities to endure an exhausting process of sorting and verifying information. It was not until the 14th day of September, 2012, exactly 2 weeks after the homicide, that they received a truly promising lead. It came from an anonymous call from a woman who revealed that the person police were looking for might be Thomas Din Bowman, someone she had known. He closely resembled the sketch and was currently living only a few blocks from the crime scene. The woman then provided the suspect's home address and further stated that he was driving a silver BMW Z4, matching the description released by police. Investigators immediately began checking Thomas Din Bowman's records. When Bowman's portrait photo appeared on the computer screen, everyone was stunned by how closely it matched the sketch. His hairstyle, facial features, and even his apparent age lined up almost perfectly. However, what surprised police even more was that Bowman was a well-regarded engineer, even considered a genius in his field. Soon after, authorities quietly planned surveillance of the home Bowman shared with his wife on 12th Avenue, less than 2 kilometers from the crime scene. For nearly a week, investigators monitored the house in secret, yet the suspicious BMW never appeared. Then one day, they saw Bowman's garage door slightly open, and inside, partially visible, was a silver BMW Z4. This became strong grounds for police to seek an emergency search warrant. On the 21st day of September, 2012, a Seattle tactical team suddenly raided the location and arrested Din Bowman as he and his wife stepped out of the house to leave for work. Bowman was then escorted directly to police headquarters for questioning. There, Din Bowman appeared extremely calm and cold and quickly demanded a lawyer as soon as the interrogation began. Before leaving the room, an investigator informed him that he would be charged with homicide, yet Bowman reacted with indifference. Meanwhile, Bowman's wife, Jennifer Palm, was questioned separately. For many hours, she failed to provide any valuable information and repeatedly responded with phrases like, "not sure," or "I do not know anything." This evasive and roundabout attitude made police suspect that Jennifer was deliberately concealing the faced-it truth. Yet the interrogation still reached a dead end without any concrete statement. Although police obtained no confession from the Bowmans, they collected significant evidence through searches of their home and vehicle. Bowman's silver BMW Z4 was found inside the garage. Upon inspection, officers discovered numerous tiny shards of glass still lodged in the passenger side window frame. This was a clear sign that the window had previously been shattered and had only recently been replaced. Not only that, the garage still reeked of fresh paint. And when investigators examined the exterior of the car, they noticed that Bowman had deliberately repainted the rims from silver to black. This suggested he had intentionally altered the car's appearance to make it harder to identify. In addition, all 4 tires were brand new, with no signs of wear. Following this trail, police discovered that immediately after the shooting, Bowman had gone straight to a tire shop in Linwood and replaced all 4 tires. Notably, according to the store manager, Bowman insisted on keeping all 4 old tires after they were removed. It was very possible that he feared the old tires might contain trace evidence from the scene, such as gunshot residue or bullet fragments, so he wanted to dispose of them himself. To erase the transaction trail, Bowman paid entirely in cash and left absolutely no personal information on the receipt. Continuing the investigation, police learned that on the first day of September 2012, less than 24 hours after Yancey was shot, the Bowmans drove to Portland, Oregon to replace the BMW's passenger side window. There, Bowman used a false name and paid in cash for the service, then immediately drove back to Seattle that same day. This suggested he deliberately traveled far outside the local area for the repair in order to avoid detection. During the search of Bowman's home, investigators also found a miniature arsenal with numerous rifles and handguns, along with a large amount of ammunition and manual reloading equipment. However, they did not find any Glock 9mm handgun. Instead, police recovered only several 9mm casings and bullets mixed among Bowman's belongings, leading them to believe he may have disposed of the firearm by dismantling it into parts. Inside the house, police also took special note of sticky notes covering a corner of the kitchen, most of them affectionate messages exchanged between the couple. The most striking was one note in which Jennifer lovingly referred to Bowman as the best sharpshooter. This detail suggested that Bowman seemed to have an intense fascination with firearms, and that his wife was fully aware of it. And beyond that, the most shocking discovery during the search was likely the seizure of a computer system with storage capacity reaching 10 terabytes at Bowman's Vague Industries workshop. Digital forensic specialists spent extensive effort recovering and examining thousands of files inside. They were then stunned to realize that Bowman had built an enormous library centered on the topic of murder. It contained hundreds of thousands of pages of material, including books, articles, and manuals on assassination skills, methods of killing, and ways to conceal crimes. In addition, the collection included many videos showing horrifying scenes, detailed instructions on firing a gun through a car window, and in-depth materials on anatomy, crime scene investigation, and interrogation techniques. Bowman even wrote his own articles and personal journals outlining plans for preparing what he considered a perfect crime. Notably, his web browsing history showed that after the 31st day of August, 2012, Bowman repeatedly read news coverage related to Yancey Knowles' case, attempted to delete his internet history, and searched for guides on how not to get caught. He even frequently visited Yancey Knowles' memorial Facebook page to see what people were writing about the victim's death. Investigators also discovered that Bowman had contacted a friend who owned a similar BMW to propose temporarily swapping vehicles, an action suggesting he intended to mislead investigators. In addition, by tracing phone data, police learned that on the night of the 31st day of August, immediately after killing Yancey, Bowman calmly went out to dinner with his wife at the Red Robin restaurant as if nothing had happened. With the massive volume of evidence collected on the 11th day of October 2012, the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office formally charged Bowman with first-degree murder with an added firearms enhancement. According to investigative records, Thomas Din Newsom Bowman was born in 1982 and was the only child in a multicultural family with an American father and a mother of Vietnamese heritage. From an early age, Bowman displayed extraordinary intelligence. At 12 years old, he was accepted into college and was repeatedly praised by local media as a prodigy. Bowman's parents held fairly open-minded views, allowing their son early exposure to guns and ammunition as a self-defense skill. His mother would later painfully admit that it had been a major mistake. From then on, shooting became Bowman's greatest passion. He trained relentlessly and soon reached the level of a skilled sharpshooter. As an adult, Bowman studied engineering. After graduating, he started his own business and founded a robotics workshop called Vague Industries. Thanks to his natural talent and a completely clean record, Bowman quickly established a solid reputation within Seattle's tech community. In 2008, Bowman married Jennifer Palm, a young and successful dentist. The two had no children and lived in a fairly simple rental home near the Roosevelt area. Although both earned good incomes, their home was surprisingly sparse. During the search, police noted that the couple did not even own a bed, using only a mattress placed directly on the floor, and the furnishings throughout the house were kept as minimal as possible. It appeared that Bowman spent most of his money on his obsession with firearms and technology projects rather than on comforts for everyday family life. Friends and acquaintances viewed the Bowmans as an intellectual couple with a stable relationship, even though both were somewhat eccentric and quite private. For that reason, no one could have imagined that Din Bowman might be connected to such a brutal killing. The true motive behind Bowman's actions became a fiercely debated topic in public opinion. He repeatedly insisted that he was innocent and later claimed it was self-defense, arguing that the victim was the one who lost control first. However, the investigation indicated that Bowman had proactively planned the killing simply to satisfy his own morbid curiosity. The trial of Din Bowman officially began in November 2014 at the King County Superior Court in Seattle. From the outset, prosecutors asserted that this was a clearly intentional homicide, not an impulsive act or self-defense. To prove their case, prosecutors presented a massive volume of evidence recovered from Bowman's computer. The data showed that Bowman had been focused on a single objective, learning how to commit a killing and avoid punishment. At the same time, Yancey Knowles' close friends were called to testify. In court, they stated that Yancey was a gentle man who was always cautious and had never shown a history of aggression or road rage. Their testimony completely undermined the narrative Bowman tried to invent, that the victim was the aggressor and that Bowman merely reacted. The defense, led by renowned attorney John Henry Brown, made a high-risk decision by putting Din Bowman on the stand to testify on his own behalf. By then, Bowman's appearance had changed dramatically from the time of his arrest. He had visibly lost weight, his hair was neatly trimmed, he wore prescription glasses, and he dressed in a blue sweater that made him look remarkably harmless. Even prosecutor Richardson reportedly acknowledged that Bowman looked like a 13-year-old boy when he appeared in court. It was a calculated transformation meant to win sympathy from the jury. On the stand, Bowman said that earlier that day, while driving, he had accidentally cut off Yancey Knoll on the freeway. According to Bowman, Knoll reacted with intense anger and followed him all the way to the intersection. He claimed that Knoll threw a wine bottle that struck him in the head, followed by another bottle thrown directly at his car. Fearing that Knoll had a gun, Bowman said he pulled a Glock from under his seat, aimed it at the victim, and fired repeatedly. He insisted that he did not intend to take the victim's life, and that he fled afterward only because he was terrified of retaliation. Bowman also testified that after escaping the scene, in a state of panic, he threw away the gun along with the wine bottle Knoll had supposedly thrown at him. As for why he did not report the incident to police, Bowman claimed he believed authorities would not believe him. After returning home, he stayed silent and did not tell his wife anything that night, nor did he tell his parents because he did not want to upset them. By the next morning, Bowman decided to conceal everything, believing that the more he explained, the more he would be blamed. However, this account quickly unraveled under the sharp cross-examination of prosecutor Kristen Richardson. Over several consecutive days, she exposed a series of illogical points in the defendant's story. For example, Bowman claimed he was panicked after the shooting, yet he was calm and capable enough to carry out a string of sophisticated actions, disposing of the gun, replacing the car window, installing a new set of tires, and erasing any suspicious traces that pointed to him. Richardson also pressed him with a difficult question. How could someone who did not intend to aim at a specific target manage to fire 4 accurate shots into the victim's head through a layer of glass? Bowman's dismissive and evasive answers caused the image of a pitiable victim he tried to build to collapse completely, revealing instead the cruel reality hidden behind an intellectual facade. In the end, after 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury found Din Bowman guilty of first-degree murder. Hearing the verdict, Din Bowman was stunned, seemingly unable to believe this outcome. Meanwhile, Yancey Knoll's family and friends broke down in tears of relief that justice had finally been served. In early January 2015, the court formally issued the sentence. In the emotionally charged hearing, Bowman's mother sobbed uncontrollably, blamed herself, and even begged to receive punishment in her son's place, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. However, faced with his mother's tears and the victim's family's pain, Bowman remained cold and detached, showing no remorse and offering no apology. He expressed only disappointment, insisting that the jury had not believed his story. In court, Judge Bruce Heller rejected the self-defense claim outright and emphasized that the defendant had shot another person without any legitimate justification. As a result, Din Bowman was sentenced to 350 months in prison, equivalent to more than 29 years, nearly the maximum penalty for this offense. The killer was taken into custody immediately afterward, but the story did not end there. Just hours after the sentence was handed down, Din Bowman attempted to take his own life in his cell using a razor, but fortunately, corrections officers discovered him in time and saved his life. This incident further showed that Bowman had completely collapsed when forced to face the harsh reality of what he had done. Another notable point is that although police believed Jennifer Palm Bowman had engaged in acts of complicity to help her husband conceal the truth, prosecutors ultimately decided not to charge her. After the case, Jennifer quickly finalized her divorce from Bowman and left the city of Seattle. She also proactively changed her name and workplace to avoid public attention. The home where the couple once lived was left empty, carrying with it the dark and heavy memories of that crime. The case involving Din Bowman and Yancey Knoll sent shockwaves through Seattle and raised many profound questions for society. What stunned the public the most was the random and senseless nature of this crime. On a broader social level, the incident also sounded a powerful alarm about gun culture and the harmful impacts of violence. Although Bowman came from a good background and had highly favorable living conditions, early exposure to firearms and a persistent obsession with violent content may have quietly nurtured distorted interests within him. This was not the first time an educated and successful individual committed a criminal act, but each time something like this happens, it raises a major question about gaps in character education and human awareness in modern society. In your view, is a nearly 30-year prison sentence truly appropriate for an experimental killer like Dinh Bowman, or does such a dangerous mind need to be permanently removed from society? Leave your opinion in the comments below so we can discuss. And if you have made it this far, do not hesitate to like, share, and subscribe to continue following Vietnamese case files for more compelling true crime stories ahead. And now, goodbye, and see you again at this same time tomorrow.